22nd, 2014 meeting of the Agency Operations Committee. Remind everybody that this meeting is being broadcast live via the internet, so prepare accordingly. Before we begin, I want to point out some minor changes that the staff has made to the structure of the agenda. There are now 4 primary sections to the agenda, in addition to the chair's opening remarks, approval of the minutes, and public testimony. The 4 sections are agency operations, financial reports, audit, and compliance monitoring. Items that were previously discussed under the Deputy Commissioner's report will now be presented as an agenda item under the related category. Also want to welcome Dora Akala. Dora attended the last July meeting, but she wasn't officially appointed at that point. Dora, you must have missed a meeting or something, but welcome. You are now official, and we're glad to have you as part of the AOC committee. Thank you. So welcome. First agenda item is the approval of the minutes of the July 23rd Agency Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
I have a motion by John. A second? Second by Asada. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Linda, I don't believe we have anybody registered to testify. Is that correct? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. First agenda item under agency operations is a report on the agency's reorganization. Commissioner Paredes, David Gardner, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy, Linda Battles, Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communication, and Bill Franz, General Counsel, will provide an overview. This item is information only, does not require any action. Commissioner?
Thank you very much. I will make very brief remarks, and others will go into greater depth about the reorganization. As all of you know, we had a couple of significant separations from the agency and among senior staff in the past 4 or 5 months. And then I was taken to thinking about the strategic planning process that we're now in the middle of for our next 15-year strategic plan. And it seemed to me that this was a good time to think about reorganization and think about for example, aligning the structure of the staff more closely with the strategic plan. We don't have a final draft of a strategic plan, and it hasn't been fully discussed at the board level, but we have a pretty good idea of the thrust of it. So I thought we could take that information and to look at reorganization. As always, we looked at reorganization as an opportunity to improve efficiency, both in terms of the effectiveness of work and in terms of the resources that the state has allocated to us. We also wanted to make sure that reorganization improved transparency, not only for the board's ability to scrutinize the work of the staff, but also to create greater transparency with the institutions and the individuals we work with, both in higher education and at the governmental level. We wanted to reorder our priorities if necessary and make sure that we were placing emphasis on the right things. As you'll recall, we had our responsibilities shifted a bit as a result of the last legislative session, and we hadn't really reorganized the staff in a way to meet those changing roles. And I also wanted to make sure that we did better succession planning. When we had several separations in the spring, it was very clear that we didn't have anybody who was immediately prepared to step in and do the same, and with the same level of expertise and the same level of knowledge about critical functions at the agency. And we wanted to make sure that we addressed that issue. We wanted to figure out a way to stimulate innovative thinking in the agency, and David Gardner had some good ideas about that, and he'll talk about those. And we wanted to improve some of the working among staff members, because it's pretty clear to me that we had a decline in morale for a variety of reasons, and I think some of it was attributable to the fact that we had too many people working in silos. who were doing their jobs sometimes quite well, but others didn't know very much about what they were doing. So I think there was a tendency to not work in cooperation with colleagues as well as we should have liked. And then ultimately, the goal was to make the agency stronger by putting our best people in positions where they could fully use their talents. And we also wanted to place our strongest mid-career people in positions that would lead to greater responsibility and give them the opportunity to prove themselves. And I think we've accomplished all of these goals in a significant way. If there are no questions, I'll just turn it over to our new Deputy Commissioner, Linda Battles.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to go ahead and go through these slides. The Commissioner, I apologize for not having this up, but the Commissioner just ran through all of his goals for the agency reorganization. And when David Gardner, Bill Franz, and I got together to come up with recommendations, we looked at these goals and we made sure that the recommendations were in alignment with achieving these goals. Here's the overall organizational structure. We provided you with copies of the former structure so that you can compare. On the surface, it doesn't appear like we've made significant changes. One obvious change is the elimination of the Associate Commissioner Chief of Staff position, which is a position I formerly held. And a lot of name changes that you'll see. But as we dive into each of these, you'll start to see where the changes are occurring in terms of transferring of functions, streamlining of functions, moving of certain individuals and their responsibilities, and so forth. Some of the changes for my area, obviously, our external relations used to be under the Commissioner's office. That's now under Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communications. And you'll see that the areas of oversight for me are service-oriented here at the agency. And then David Gardner has a lot of the programmatic responsibilities and policy development and so forth. And I think the bulk of the changes are really under David Gardner. But I'll go ahead and go through some of the changes that we're making in my area, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bill to go over some changes in the General Counsel's office, and then he'll turn it over to David Gardner, who will provide the rest of the changes. I just wanted to also note that we're working on the more detailed organizational charts for you, and we're hoping this actually took effect when we rolled it out agency-wide on Friday, October 17th, and we're working towards having everything in place by November 1, with the exception of some of the new positions or modified positions that we are going to need to post and conduct those job searches. But our goal is to have key people in place in advance of the legislative session, which begins in January. A couple of other changes I just want to quickly mention. Because we eliminated my former position, I'm leaving myself with some of those duties. I was the alternative dispute resolution coordinator for the agency and oversaw the negotiated rulemaking process, which Senate Bill 215 recently required us to engage in. And we are going to be appointing Dr. Mary Smith, who's the Assistant Deputy Commissioner. And she has done a fabulous job in serving as a facilitator for several of our negotiated rulemaking committees. So she's got that process down pretty good. So she will continue working in collaboration with Bill Franz, General Counsel's office, and Lori Frederick, who currently serves as a convener for that process, will continue in that role. One other announcement I wanted to make was Angelica Reyes, the Commissioner's executive assistant. And she joined us last month and has been doing a fabulous job. But she's also going to serve as a board liaison. So she will be your new point of contact for any information that you need. So it'll be her name now in your email boxes that you'll be getting notifications from.
I should mention. I should mention a couple of things very quickly. David Gardner will now be acting commissioner when I'm out of the office, and he's will clearly be the chief academic officer. Linda will be the chief operations officer, and our new senior leadership team, which previously was composed of me, Arturo Alonso, Linda, and David, is now composed of Linda, David, me, and Bill Franz.
I also wanted to make one correction on this chart as well. It was pointed out to me by several board members. Thank you so much. The general counsel, the line, the dotted line to the board should be a solid line, and it should be a dotted line to the commissioner, similar to the way that the internal auditor and compliance monitor looks. We'll make that change.
Linda, congratulations to you. I mean, we've certainly enjoyed. I think I speak for the board when I say that you've been timely and always kept us up to speed, and we have a great deal of confidence in you. Just one question: it kind of looks like to me that your old role has kind of been put into what Arturo handled in the past, more or less. Is that correct? So not only all of the financial, now external relations and everything is under your responsibility. Is that pretty much correct?
That's pretty much correct. I do want to say that we are reconfiguring the Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services position to serve as the agency's Chief Financial Officer.
Okay.
We felt that instead of having that at the deputy level, the deputy commissioner level, that it would be more effective to have that at the assistant commissioner level because they're more intimately involved with the daily accounting and finance functions of the agency.
You just answered my question.
We wanted a professional in that role, and that will free up Linda to take on.
Well, that was my question, in that your background is not necessarily in accounting or whatever. So we're very concerned about those.
Okay.
Dollars.
Yeah, absolutely, and I am too. So that's precisely why we made that recommendation. Okay. Very quickly, I'm just going to point this out because Mark Pale is going to go into more detail about his area, internal audit and compliance monitoring. He's going to make a presentation on a benchmarking study that you all asked him to conduct. But as part of the reorganization, he shared with us that the study revealed that he really needed 2 more FTE to help with the workload. So we were able to provide, with existing resources, funding for an additional FTE, and that's what that audit supervisor is going to be. Now, my understanding is that Mark will continue to provide the supervision of all of the auditors and compliance monitors, but this would just be sort of like an audit leader to help Mark. But he'll go into more detail about that later in another agenda item later on in the agenda. So this is the overall organizational chart for the Deputy Commissioner, Agency Operations. We really didn't have any structural changes to the External Relations Department other than moving it from the Commissioner's office over to the Deputy Commissioner's office. We recently conducted an open search for the director position, and I appointed John Wyatt to serve as the leader of that department. He's in the process of filling 2 vacancies. There's John. Thank you, John. He's in the process of filling 2 vacancies, an assistant director position and a program specialist position, but obviously we are working to get those positions in place well in advance of the session, which is actually around.
We're not having to pay him double, are we?
No. We also have no structural changes to the Human Resources Department. We currently are in the middle of conducting a search for the director. Bill Franz and I have been interviewing. We are going to have a decision here next week for a director. So Looking forward to that. And we didn't have any structural changes to information solutions and services at Sid Hutchins area. We did, however, transfer one staff member from our financial services to ISS because we assessed this individual's responsibilities and experience and felt that she was a better match in ISS, and I think she'll provide some helpful support work over there. Here's the Financial Services Division, and here's where we made some significant structural changes. As you know, the findings of the internal audit that was conducted earlier this year on the Beyond Time program revealed that the operations and accounting duties that were aggregated in the Assistant Commissioner position, this was the position that existed prior to the changes about 6 months ago, had vested too much direct control over the loan program operations and also business operations. And the audit report had recommended that management reevaluate the configuration of that position and consider a redistribution of duties, especially as it pertained to both the loan program operations and the oversight of agency business operations. The audit also recommended that the organizational structure promote dialogue between accounting and operations areas of the agency. So the preliminary management response to this recommendation over 6 months ago was to create two separate divisions, which then created an interim assistant commissioner for financial services and an interim assistant commissioner for student financial aid programs. But as we developed this reorganization plan and we reevaluated the idea of having two separate divisions, we took into account administrative efficiencies as well as the need to foster the communications between student financial aid programs and business operations. Ultimately, we didn't see the benefit of having two separate divisions. We viewed the administration of loan programs as a business function. And now that our Sunset Bill requires us to engage in negotiated rulemaking for the development of the allocation methodologies for all of our state financial aid programs, we feel that that serves well under the business functions of the agency and in terms of dispersing those dollars back to the institutions. In order to fully address the audit findings, we did create a new position, and that's the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs. And you'll see that on the right part of the chart, overseeing the Director of Loans, Director of Loan Repayments, and Director of Grants and Special Programs. And obviously this Deputy Assistant Commissioner will report to the Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services. We consulted with Mark Pale to ensure that this structure adequately addressed the concerns and the findings and recommendation of the Beyond Time audit, and he concurred that this was an appropriate approach, that we could do it many different ways, and this was one way that was an effective way. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to configure the Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services as the Chief Financial Officer. And we've put in place a Director of Financial Reporting and Senior Director of Financial Services. What's missing from this area is contracts and purchases and those functions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bill to go over his area.
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon. In keeping with the Commissioner's vision of how we should go about looking at potential reorganization, one of the hallmarks of that vision was to increase efficiency where feasible. And by combining purchasing and contracts administration with the legal department, we believe that we have increased the efficiency and effectiveness of the agency in that arena. Let me walk you through what we have done here with the General Counsel's office. As you'll recall, previously the General Counsel's office had assistant general counsels and one program specialist. The office now has two assistant general counsels, We're looking to hire a third, hopefully shortly. It has our procurement director, who is also the agency's hub coordinator. We have hired a hub liaison, assistant purchaser.
Bill, you might want to explain what HUB is.
I'm sorry, it's a historically underutilized business coordinator, and the position is designed to increase purchases from, as the name implies, historically underutilized businesses. Generally, women-owned companies or firms, African-American owned, Hispanic owned, different types of purchases would include commodities, although it doesn't pertain very much to this agency, construction and transportation, which the Texas Department of Transportation obviously utilizes hubs in very large numbers. We historically have not been able to do so. So part of the request from the commissioner was that we try to do our best to increase the percentage of purchases the coordinating board makes from hubs. And I think we've been blessed in that we've been able to attract and hire some extraordinary people. The procurement director comes to us with about a dozen years of top flight purchasing experience, part of that time in higher ed at the University of Texas System. She was also with the Public Utility Commission and has a lot of experience not just in purchasing, but in hub coordination. And so we expect that she will have insights that we previously lacked in being able to increase the percentage of agency purchases from hubs. Our hub liaison assistant purchaser comes to us from the comptroller's office, and he's got significant experience in dealing with hubs on a statewide basis. Indeed, he was the number 2 person at the comptroller in terms of trying to get minority-owned businesses to become hubs so that they could participate in the statewide program. The lead grants and contract specialist title that you see there is a person who's been with the agency for a number of years, and we're fortunate to retain her services in that capacity. She has been doing that job for at least the last 3.5, 4 years and does a real good job of it. The assistant general counsels we were able to hire thus far, one has about a dozen years of experience and is viewed as one of the state's leading experts in government contracts and grants. Indeed, when he was at the comptroller's office, he was always one of the participants in leading discussions at continuing education programs put on by the comptroller in that area. The other person comes to us with about a quarter century of experience, a little bit broader based, but significant experience again in contracts and grants, and he comes to us from HHSC, where he was responsible for multi-million-dollar contracts and grants. So as I said, I think we've been fortunate in being able to attract and employ really top-flight people, and I think that we have positioned the agency better moving forward to be more efficient and more productive in this area. If there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. Yes, sir, Mr. Steen.
So this is new where they're moving purchasing under you?
It is, sir.
It is.
There are other agencies that have that alignment, but we have not.
Well, I haven't seen it much in my experience in state government. Usually purchasing is in a separate area. And I'm sure we've got great people here, but purchasing is one of the areas we need to keep an eye on very closely. And I'm just talking about generally. And so tell me about bringing it under your supervision in terms of safeguards and that sort of thing. Is that going to improve it in that regard?
I don't know that it will improve safeguards, but it certainly won't lessen any safeguards. We think that the function was already safeguarded to an appropriate degree. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question about an improvement in it, but the purchaser will report to me, and we will review purchases on a regular, ongoing basis.
And you weren't doing that before?
I was not, sir.
Well, I think it's a good move, and I'm glad to see it under your supervision, and I would like for you to keep a close eye on everything.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So under normal circumstances, I think the purchasing comes under operation, right?
In many agencies, it does.
And so if, and also kind of on the CFO side too. So either it would be under CFO or under operation. And I agree with John that this is very unique that it comes under General Counsel. And so it probably is a good move, but it's a kind of a latest, new, different move that in normal circumstances in the private sector, you don't see that. So what were the thoughts behind bringing this under General Counsel? Under legal, rather, I would use the word even.
That the way purchasing and contract administration historically has been handled at the coordinating board has been that a division, for example, that wants to initiate a contract or a grant or a purchase, which of course results in a contract, would go to the purchaser or contract specialist and at the same time be coming to the legal department to ask for preliminary review of the legalities of the proposed transaction, as well as a review of, if it's going to be a contract or a grant, the scope of the work to make sure that it complies with any pertinent statutes. That seemed to be an overlapping of duties. And, matter of fact, it to a degree is an overlap of duties. And by concentrating all of the personnel in one area, we hope to be able to streamline those duties to make it a more efficient process.
I'd like to amplify what Bill just said. There were some other considerations, Mr. Cumber. For example, we get hammered at the beginning of every session for our underutilization of HUBs. I have not been pleased by the effectiveness of the people that were in charge of that part of our work, and I think that we're going to be more aggressive about it. But being more aggressive means that you're likely to run more foul of federal and state laws. So I thought that it made sense to connect this to the General Counsel's office, and frankly, my campus experience was that there was a very close connection between the General Counsel's office at my university and contracts, grants, administration, and purchasing.
Right.
I thought that the purchasing could be done well in the General Counsel's office because we're a mid-sized agency, and so it's not an onerous business. I thought that having somebody who had expertise in purchasing and had worked very effectively to meet our obligations in using hub businesses made sense. And I talked to Bill and David and Linda about this. And the other consideration is the one that you all raised just a moment ago, where we doing too much in the deputy commissioner's area of operation. And so I thought if Linda is going to keep external relations, then we need to take something away from her so that we spread the work around more easily. And it made sense to me that given the size of the agency, that purchasing and the hub work could be done out of the general counsel's office.
I think I agree. It makes sense. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Question.
Excuse me. Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was first.
Go ahead.
Actually, Commissioner, I think this is really a brilliant idea because as organizations get bigger, what you see mostly with, and I own several contracts, large contracts myself, and what happens is it's really easy to get away from the language of the contract. If you're doing the actual operations of that contract or that program or purchasing what it is, and what happens is many times the general counsel department gets a little bit more isolated from your actual operations people, and when that happens, you see a lot of compliance issues. You see a lot of you amended the contract on a handshake and you really didn't write it down, those sorts of things, and that ends up costing you a lot of money in the end. So when you first popped this up, I thought, oh, I would love to have that, but it really will, I think, will ease your burden, but I think it is a brilliant idea to have the oversight, at least by legal, when you're working with just your operations and purchasing. And now the hub thing is another, just that's a task you have to do. But I really think that the purchasing part is a very appropriate place to put there. So whoever came up with that, congratulations.
Just want to add one thing. One thing that isn't obvious as well, by putting this in the general counsel's office, it actually pulls these things up higher in the organization. And so, we have much more connection with, they're not an afterthought, and I think it really, really helps to make whatever issues evident much more quickly.
Well, and your accountability should be better. That's what I would aim for.
People are going to look at the terms of the contracts much more closely if they know the general counsel has got oversight.
It won't just be in a drawer somewhere and somebody forgets where you kept it.
But I think it's important to point out we're not talking about buying pencils and Big Chief tablets when we're talking about purchasing. We're talking about significant contracts with significant amounts of money in most cases. Is that?
We're talking about Big Chief tablets as well.
We're talking about everything.
Sure.
Yeah,
but
Big Chief tablets to multi-million-dollar purchases or contracts. And you're going to hear about one later today. That could be, over a span of time, worth millions to the vendor and hopefully help us facilitate our loan program. And so, yes, as an example, let's just use that one, and I'm getting ahead of the program, but you're going to hear about it shortly. Both the purchaser and one of the assistant general counsels and myself are all involved in varying degrees, along with the information system solutions personnel and the business office personnel, in trying to make sure that we have as ironclad a contract as we can have with that potential vendor. So to answer your question, they really do run the gamut from A to Z. And one of the things that we do want to do in an effort to increase our hub utilization percentage, the historically underutilized business percentage of purchases, is to make sure that the purchaser, our procurement director, that everything is centralized in her so that she can stay on top of that and not simply come in 5-6 months later to do a report and go, the numbers aren't good again. This way she can know if we're trending in the wrong direction and attempt to correct that. So I think overall it will increase efficiency, effectiveness, and the agency's productivity.
And I would just want to make sure the cost of paper clips are important. But if you're not watching the paper clips, then you're probably not watching as closely as you could in other areas. And many times you were reviewing something based on the contract language and law rather than what was being procured.
That's correct. And in many cases, purchase orders themselves would not even come through the legal department for review.
Okay.
All other contracts would, but not necessarily purchase orders.
Okay.
John?
I'd like for our internal auditor to weigh in on this. When's the last time that you audited the purchasing area?
Mark, come on up.
Over there.
Purchasing, actually, I don't think that we have done a direct audit of purchasing since I began in 2012, but the State Comptroller's Office did a pretty comprehensive post-payment audit, and they take a deep dive into the purchasing area, and the kinds of issues that they had were, relatively minor exceptions. That report was presented to the committee. That was probably about a year ago, and there was nothing of significance that came out of that. So it has been looked at. Aspects of it are looked at, through our financial audit conducted by KPMG, and it's on our list of areas to periodically review based on risk assessment.
Wouldn't this be wouldn't you say this was a high risk area? Generally, purchasing, yeah.
Certainly, and contracting more specifically.
Right.
Yes.
Of course, I would think you'd like to move, that's another subject, but to move it up on your list of audits. But what do you think about this reorganization?
Well, I think, the idea is sound. I think that, there are risks in anytime you realign functions, there's risk, but there's also, as long as there's controls in place, you have a sound set of documentation, policies, and procedures. And I know from participation in executive committee meetings that as this thing is evolving, there's a related discussion about having the policies and procedures in all of these areas. And even the commissioner mentioned a moment ago about succession planning. And, having people that are fully aware of what the operating practices should be and are. And so I haven't developed any concern, based on how this is realigned. And actually, I think that Bill Franz was able to determine that there are other organizations that have moved in this direction. And so, it's a chance to try to leverage those strengths that bringing those functions together will allow.
Thank you.
I was kind of surprised when I saw this reorganization. As you know, my background is with the federal government and military bases. And, of course, the contracting and the purchasing is a directorate all separate and apart. And, of course, the government has big contracts. And many times I always wondered, do you have legal? Because legal, general counsel is in a directorate all by itself, separate and apart, and never the twain shall meet. And whenever we would have some problems, I would always say, did you counsel with legal? Did you have legal? At least if you weren't sure what the wording was, take a look. Well, no, because, they're involved in their cases. And so when I saw this, I said, hey, man, maybe that's. I thought it was a good move. So that's my input.
Thank you. David?
Thank you. So, let's see, you have the right chart above you. This is, of course, the overall organization at a high level. Just to remind you who a couple people are, you heard about Mary Smith earlier. She's an assistant deputy commissioner, so she will be adding the negotiated rulemaking, and she's really the person who does all kinds of things that behind the scenes. You'll be going to the governing board conference later, and she's the one who really does all the work behind that. And she was responsible for the tuning process, a whole range of things. So she's sort of the go-to person and has always helped work across divisions for us. The Senior Director for Grant Development, you may not be aware, with this title is actually Nina Wright. She's also Executive Director of the College for All Texans Foundation. What you'll see mainly in this chart is a change of names. We'll get into more detail later, but you'll see that the academic quality and workforce was WAR. College readiness and success was PETA 16. Strategic planning and funding was planning and accountability. And this box at the end is totally new, and we'll get into that more as we go forward. This is the Academic Quality and Workforce Division. As I just said, it had been the WAR division. Part of what's happening with these titles of divisions is sort of showing a new emphasis in the type of work they're doing. And there are things that we've been moving towards over the years, and this is sort of the capstone of that happening, and also reflects where we think, at least, the new strategic plan for higher education will be going. But as we met, Linda, Bill and I met, one thing that became evident to us as we looked at everything the divisions were doing is, historically in higher education we talk about workforce, that means career tech education. But the reality is, as we looked at it, when we produce teachers, that's part of the workforce. When we produce an engineer, that's clearly part of the workforce. And we just wanted to emphasize that these are all of our programs really have some impact on the workforce, and wanted to more clearly make that an overall focus and make that evident to everyone. The Commissioner and I this morning were talking about a couple of PhD programs. So we have to be concerned about, are we producing the right kind of PhDs, and from the student perspective, are they going to get a job? So this will be a great more emphasis. You saw that with 414, the study that Rand did, we started more intensely looking at the workforce. You've seen in our LAR in another division side, we're asking for a position specifically to do more analysis of the workforce. So this is a heavy emphasis. Academic quality, as you know, we cannot close programs any longer, but we're going to need to find ways to look at the quality of existing programs. Even though we can't close anything, we can make evident, we can provide good feedback to institutions and institutions, students and institutions as we go forward about at least small clusters of programs across the state, and do that every year. We've divided it up clearly into the workforce quality area and academic quality with some different emphases. So you'll know the workforce quality is Gary Tomerlin, and the academic quality is Stacy Silverman. They've both done good work in these areas. The manager of special projects, the title could be clearer. I think we need to address that. But this is a person that addresses for-profit institutions, and the Commissioner has emphasized the need to put more effort into that. We have a number of institutions nationally that are having some issues in terms of, are they providing the services to students, or what are they doing with financial aid? And we're in fact going to have a meeting to talk about what more we can do with that going forward. It's a Director of Teacher Quality Grants Program that had been in the PETA 16 division. That was sort of an anomaly from years ago. We had teacher issues and educational prep issues sorted out between PETA 16 and WAR previously. Now they're being centered, with one exception, in this division. We'll have increased emphasis on educator preparation. And that's the main change, and it's really emphasis. The emphasis will be different, and you'll see that going forward. And we will, how we do some of these things will be developed even more as we go forward. So tying it in with the strategic plan, you've seen that one of the goals we're talking about is every student should graduate with the program, whether it's anthropology or electrical engineering, with marketable skills. One thing we're discussing is making it as a required part of program approval going further, that they actually identify the marketable skills for their students when they graduate, and how they're going to address that as they go forward, so they don't just think about a job when they are about to graduate, so that they start thinking about that from day one. The Assistant Commissioner for College Readiness and Success, again, this is the PETA 16 area. This reflects a change in emphasis over the years, as some the large legislative dollars have gone away, and we've focused increasingly on primarily college readiness. We will still have some outreach built into this, but this includes programs like Advise Texas, for example. We are moving Apply Texas, the statewide college application system, into this division. In terms of college readiness, it fits with their work much better. What you see is student support. This was a recommendation of Bill, and it makes sense. Our obligations to have a student complaint area, and so that this is a new position. We haven't had this previously, but it makes sense that it fits in with this division and having more direct contact with students and following up. Student success includes areas such as, you're well aware of our developmental education and adult education efforts. You haven't necessarily thought of some of the things this division has been doing with AVID and some other programs having directly to do with student success once the student arrives on campus. At our last board meeting under recognition of excellence, you'll remember a program from the University of Houston. That was a program that was developed with some help from this division, Kristen Kramer, who will be the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Success. So it's taking what we've done, it's narrowed over time as we've found out what's more important, and we're going to focus our efforts on these things going forward. Strategic planning and funding. This had been planning and accountability. This really more accurately reflects what the division's doing at this point, particularly since we don't have program approval any longer. But the strategic planning, as you can see, works with things such as our accountability system, our almanac. They'll do workforce analysis, create data for career colleges. They directly support the academic quality and workforce division. They're the folks that oversee the evaluation efforts for all our programs across the agency. Whether we contract for them with outsiders, they review the contracts, make sure that they really are doing the right kind of things in terms of evaluation. When we don't have the funds, they actually conduct the evaluations themselves. They work with our pathway efforts in communities where we link data from ISDs, community colleges and universities, and provide direct analytical support to them in our educational research centers. Funding, you know about these areas well. It's just really retitled. They still will do work on facilities. They will probably produce an annual report or biannual report on facility usage at the school. So while we won't have approval, we'll be developing data from reports on our data without editorial comment, just factual, and a lot of these reports will be very important. And the Commissioner has equated them in some ways to the Congressional Budget Office that can put out some key reports, and you don't need to have a lot of them, you just have to have the right ones. And of course, all the data, the EDC, you may not know that, it's the Educational Data Center. All the data from all over the state comes into that one group, and they're the ones responsible for editing the data, getting back to the schools in terms of after they run edit checks where there may be issues with the data. They're the ones who have to make the phone calls when people aren't submitting their data. But all the data analysis we do at the agency comes from data that was originally collected through this division. Formula funding dollars are generated from the data that comes in here. So it's a massive operation, and the Commissioner has reminded you lately, but we do have either the best or the second best data system in the country, and it's primarily due to their efforts. I was in Washington at a meeting recently, and several speakers brought up this data system. So they sort of labor in the background, but the beginning of it are the people in EDC that make sure the data is reported. Okay, finally, the largest change is everyone is just so busy that we haven't had anyone who's really had the time to sort of keep track of national and international higher education issues. Where are things bubbling up? Where are things happening that we need to track? What are promising new innovations and new approaches in higher education? How are policies and what new policies are being developed in other states that might be fruitful in Texas? And one of their key roles will be to meet every month with leaders from our various divisions to share with them what they're finding and also hear from them what they think are concerns and where they might follow up in more detailed research. So they will be, in a way, a think tank that has to work within our agency. By the way, we didn't mention that when you see new positions here, there are no new dollars. This isn't reallocation of existing dollars and taking positions and sometimes combining two positions into one. So we're doing all of this with existing dollars, and I think that's important to understand. And the divisions support the creation of this group because they know it will be very helpful. Sometimes when you've got the basic foundation of issues and something comes up, you can react much more quickly than if you have to go out and start from scratch. And on the other hand, you may identify promising practices that you might not have before. This will be much more deliberate than it would have been. Specifically, one director will focus on innovations, whether it's instruction, whether it could be other things, whether how to even construct facilities more cheaply. They might get into P2 3, public-private partnership issues, depending on how it occurs. The policy development individual will have a heavy part of what they spend their time on: financial aid, grant applications, and new models across the country and even in other areas. How do we better structure grant programs? In the what you heard from Linda, that group is going to be done more as a business. This person in particular will be responsible for continually evaluating, are there better ways of doing this? Are people discovering things rather than it being just something on top of what they do, and they don't really have time to do it regularly. So the point is a way to help us be a bit more of a cutting-edge organization to help people do their regular job better. And that's pretty much it.
Any questions, comments for the presenters? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great work. The next item is a report on the Henson Hazelwood College Student Loan Program. Lisa Moeller, Interim Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will present an overview of the loan program. This is a report only and does not require any board action. Lisa?
Good afternoon. I don't mind sharing that I have an affinity for this loan program. After all, I was 21 years old when I first started working for the coordinating board during my final semester as a UT student. I worked on the night crew. I was skip tracing returned mail. All these years later, the loan program has survived the changing times, and so have I. If I were allowed to present only one slide, this one would be it. Besides the fact that the program is self-supporting, doesn't rely on taxpayers, it's an excellent value for Texas students. Loan repayments and depositor interest cover the bond and administrative costs. And the third bullet is significant. We've seen periods when the coordinating board has been one of just a very few lenders in the state, as well as periods when there were many, many private lenders offering marketing student loans. So it's very important that there be a stable source of funds for Texas students. I'd like you to meet Representative George Henson and Senator Grady Hazelwood. In 1965, when the coordinating board was created and the Higher Education Act came into being, these guys had the vision to fund a college loan program for Texas students through the sale of tax-exempt general obligation bonds. And they sponsored legislation that created the Texas Opportunity Plan Fund. This was the first program of its kind nationally, and it's still the only student loan program that is fully backed by general obligation bonds. Voters have approved bond authority 8 times, resulting in the disbursement of approximately $2.7 billion in low-interest student loans to Texas students. This slide illustrates the full cycle of the flow of funds, beginning with net bond sale proceeds. And of course, when we're through with the slides, if you have any detailed questions about this, Ken's here to answer those questions. The first, second, and third bullets are closely related and are very important. There have been periods when borrower confusion was a major concern nationally. Even the most conscientious borrowers were not sure whom to contact for help because their loans had been sold frequently and sometimes to multiple servicers. Hinson Hazelwood borrowers have never had to worry about that. Although borrowers have many opportunities to work out payment arrangements, in the event of default, accounts are referred to the Office of Attorney General for litigation and collections, which I'll cover on a later slide. The College Access Loan Portfolio is the main component of the Hinson Hazelwood College Student Loan Program. We've confirmed that our 5.25% fixed annual interest rate is the lowest alternative loan rate nationally, with payments deferred while the borrower is in school. We have identified a slightly lower interest rate in Rhode Island, but the borrowers and cosigners must meet the highest credit standards and begin repayment immediately after the loan is disbursed in order to qualify for that lower rate. Also, we're unaware of any other lenders who do not capitalize interest after in-school periods and other deferments. And of course, the cost to borrowers are lower when the interest is not compounded. Since so many college access loan cosigners are parents, the comparative interest rate for federal parent loans is worth noting, the current rate being 7.21% for the year. Last spring, we implemented a 3-tier loan origination fee structure based on credit standards. Most of our borrowers do qualify for the 0% origination fee. And lastly, the current default rate is very low at 3.35%.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you say the default rate is low, what's that based on?
Well, the actual calculation, I'll have to turn to my expert.
No, but it's low relative to what?
Relative to other default rates that we've seen. I mean, it's very low. I can't quote you the rates of other programs, but we have looked at that.
For example, to take the other extreme, the default rate for students at some proprietary schools on loans is sometimes as high as 35%. Mm-hmm. Wow. So 33 point, what is it? It's extremely low.
Thank you.
The next slide includes the main eligibility requirements for college access loans. I think the fourth bullet is very important because very few middle-income families have the amount of cash savings needed to meet the expected family contribution, or EFC, that's calculated according to federal methodology. Cal loans can be used to cover all or part of the EFC. The next two slides include statistics for fiscal year 2014, just to give you an idea of the volume of daily activities for the loan program. I'll give you a chance I won't read them to you, and as you can see, there is a lot of work being done. These are just the highlights. Certainly there are many other activities that are not included here, but again, it's a lot of work being done by 56 people. In 2009, the Coordinating Board entered into an interagency agreement with the Office of Attorney General to beef up collections efforts on our defaulted loans. We even transferred some of our staff to that office for continuity of knowledge and leadership. As you can see, this was a very good move. It resulted in a 238% increase in collections over the years. The staff at the OAG have done an excellent job. And that concludes my presentation. I think I got it in 5 minutes.
Okay, questions? Mr. Hunt?
What is the maximum loan amount?
It's up to cost of attendance, so there is no, it's cost of attendance less other financial aid.
Okay, what all is included in cost of attendance?
Well, that would be tuition fees, books, cost of transportation, room and board.
Okay, so maybe depending on where they were going.
Right,
okay.
and how much other aid they've received.
To give you a little bit of background, I think the average loan right now is around $11,000 per person annually.
Annually or semester?
Annually.
Annually. Okay. Thank you.
And how quickly, either after they discontinue going or they graduate, how quickly are they required to start repayment?
There's a 6-month grace period following the last date of enrollment for at least a half-time course load.
Okay. And what are the repayment terms?
For borrowers who owe less than $30,000, it's a 10-year repayment period. It's a 20-year period if they owe more than that. And we've been talking about looking at, having some sort of a graduated means of, terms of repayment, which of course would require some cash flows to be run. And but that's something we've been talking about lately.
The fact that it's not a compounding is, it's significant.
Yes.
You add that interest on to the balance, and then versus not doing that. So if they borrow $10,000, then whatever that interest is for that period is added to the loan, but not to the principal. Is that correct?
It essentially functions as principal, and therefore more interest adds after. In the case of compounding interest,
right?
But
in this case, the principal and interest are kept separate.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
The interest just accumulates during that period.
Okay.
Other questions? John?
Just wanted to compliment you on your presentation.
Well, thank you.
So you kept that within 5 minutes?
It was when I timed it.
But I'm new to a lot of this, and you covered everything, and it was very well done. Appreciate it.
Commissioner?
Well, I wanted, as an informational item, I wanted this presentation made to the board because I really think that what we've done with this loan program represents the coordinating board's work at its best. It's entirely student focused. Everything we do is, can we hold interest rates down, and can we make more loans? And we treat students fairly. The partnership with, as Lisa pointed out, with the Attorney General's office has worked out great. Academics are not very good at collecting loans or collecting debt. This is probably the best loan program of its type in the country, and it's all about helping students finish their programs. So, great job, Lisa. Thank you,
Mr. Hahn.
On the slide that has the $150 million in loans dispersed, there were 33,422 applications, and it says 15,400 students. Were the balance parents or?
We don't make loans to parents. Let me see the slide you're looking at. Well, there are 2 disbursements generally for one loan.
Okay, so it's for a year? Or for
Albert, the loan applications process, 33,000 applications, 15,000 students. I guess the question is...
Not all applications come to fruition.
But it's almost half. I didn't notice that.
The application count would be all applications submitted, reviewed. Not all students complete the process. Some never get to the university, never register. So the numbers of applications, it's not uncommon for it to exceed the number of actual loans.
Okay, but for those that applied and did finish, how many of them actually funded? I mean, if you had...
What's the rejection rate?
Yeah, what's the rejection rate?
We can get that.
We can get that for you. I'd be estimating on the number of actual loans as compared to the number of applications processed.
For example, if a student doesn't, applies on his or her own credit, it doesn't want to get a cosigner and doesn't qualify, then we send them back. We'll send them back and say you need to find a credit-worthy cosigner. So I guess that would count as one application that didn't, get approved.
Okay.
Sometimes the school will certify a loan and offer it as part of a financial aid package, but the student chooses not to go out there and actually complete the application. They may start it and then never complete it.
And the default rate is it? If I understood, it's like 180 days.
Technical default is 180 days. I'm not sure, Catherine. That's how it's calculated for that. Okay. We refer it to the Attorney General's office at 150 days. A final demand goes out at that point, and 180 days is the official date of default.
Okay.
Jerry?
I was just wondering, for any students who complete a degree and then the job that they can get with that degree just doesn't, they can't really work out the funding where they can pay it off in your set amount of time of 10 or 20 years. Is there anything where you are able to prorate based upon their income that they can show you so that they don't go into default just because they happen to pursue a degree where they can't get a very high-paying job afterwards?
Yes, we offer the same income-sensitive and graduated repayment schedules that are offered in the federal loan program, and periods of forbearance. People can choose to make interest payments during certain periods. Of course, there's a limit to what we can agree to over a period of time, but certainly the people in the beginning that are struggling, we work with them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And didn't we ask in our LAR for additional funds for this program? Or it's not required because it's bond?
Right.
Right, no. And there's no state funding that supports the program.
That was the grant, Texas grants.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Next item on the update on the purchase of the new student loan management and origination system. Ken Martin, Interim Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services, Chief Financial Officer, will provide a brief update on this contract. This is information only, does not require any action. Ken?
Good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What we want to do here is back in July of 2013, the board had asked staff to solicit a proposal for our existing loan software and look for new loan software. And we initiated an RFQ. We had a committee of 9 members assembled that represented both finance, the loan operation, as well as SIDS area ISS. And we went through 10 bid proposals that were received. 2 were rejected for non-qualification. 3 were for litigation only. After evaluating those, the thought process there was if we had a litigation component and we had a thank you. And litigation component and use the existing software. Since we're a tiered pricing system based on volume in the software, the thought process was could we reduce loan volume in the existing software, maintain that, and build out a new litigation functionality and migrate loans over there, thus lowering price here and have cost.
Ken, pull the microphone closer.
In evaluating that, we determined that pricing that was too high, plus it was too difficult to try and link both systems together to have the proper flow of loans and maintain the integrity of the loan program. So we had 3 bids out of the 10 that were for outsourcing services, and in evaluating those are all on a price per transaction basis. So the issue that we ran into there is we'd be in the same position we are today as our portfolio grows. It went from $800 million to $1.2 billion over the last couple of years. As it continues to grow, our pricing structure will continue to grow. Plus, the outsourcers were all out of state. So that was one item that we evaluated. With that said, we had 2 bids that were for what I'll call a full solution or as full as possible out of all the requirements that we laid out. And out of those bids, we selected one vendor, and that was Nelnet. We had taken an approach with this from the standpoint of sensitivity from the bidding process and an attempt to maintain that bidding process and enhance our ability for negotiations. We, staff recommended that we seek chair, vice chair, and AOC chair approval for the software, which we did. And so then we began the negotiating and contracting process there. We're in the midst of looking at the contract, and we're working with Bill's team. As he mentioned, this is the software directly that it was saying this is the advantage of having procurement contracts within the general counsel's office, because procurement was up front starting this, but it was good to have general counsel in the beginning and in this process now to know what we can do, where we can have levers within the contract that we're looking at today to see what we can change. Can we add this? Can we subtract this, et cetera? So we want to make sure we build a strong foundation in this contract, avoid some of the items, I'll say, that we had previously back in 2007 with the existing software when it came in. With that said, pricing on this software is going to be on an annual basis versus a tiered. It'll be a fixed price. It produces approximately $600,000 of savings versus $1.3 million projected for 2016. And with that said, if there's any information that I can provide or questions that Sid and I can answer, we'll be happy to.
Questions?
What's the timeline for conversion once this contract is finalized, assuming it is? What is the conversion time? Is it a flip the switch and which I don't think.
No. We wish it was that easy. The software is from a similar vendor. It's a subsidiary of 5280 is our current vendor, and Nelnet is a subsidiary within the parent company. So it is similar software. It has enhanced functionality and more up-to-date SQL-based instead of COBOL-based, etc. But with that, it doesn't mean we can have the light switch conversion that we'd love to have. We need to look at this core software and evaluate what we currently have in comparison to what the core has to make sure that whatever enhancements we've made significant, as Sid's painfully aware over time, that we need to evaluate all of those items and see what the vendor needs to make modifications to their core to fit our current demand requirements. So from that standpoint, timeline, we don't have a specific because we're still in the process of negotiations on a few items with the vendor. So until we can get to that point and make sure that we both agree on all the items that will be included in the software, it's difficult to nail down an exact timeline. Estimation of a timeline, we are looking at that. We have an estimated project plan. I would say probably January of next year would be a conservative estimate at this point. January, of 16. We're looking to start this January, but January of 16 to have a full completion. And if we can do it earlier, we're certainly going to build that out and push to do so.
Janelle.
Thank you. Just checking. This popped out at me, and it may just be a typo. On the blue page, it says produces between 600,000 annual savings versus 1.3 billion. B on the blue page. Just want to make sure that's a typo.
That is a typo. There should be 1.3 million.
Okay, thanks. Makes me
we
feel
would
better.
do it for sure, right?
Yeah, we'd want it a little quicker.
We might move this out a little quicker.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys want to cover any of these additional bullets?
No, these are just informational at this point.
Supplemental.
Yeah, some of the items that I covered with our outsourcing.
Thank you.
So this is supposed to save us about $700,000 a year?
Approximately $600,000 annually. Correct. We'll have the one-time fees up front, of course, for the migration, et cetera. And then from there, we'll have our ongoing flat rate not tied to our loan portfolio size, our growth, et cetera. And that'll be roughly $700,000 annually just for the software and about a $50,000 maintenance cost on top of that.
That's terrific.
Sada, you have a question?
So I see that the current contract expires in 17.
Correct.
So you were suggesting that we will be able to bring the new one by 16.
Correct. That is our intent. We have 2 years left on the
paying any penalty?
Sure.
For that 1 year extra? We are getting out of the present contract in 16? No.
Oh, yes, sir. We have an existing contract. We have optional years. Okay. So we are in the phase now where every year is an optional year, and we have to give them notice 1 year in advance. What we're working with Bill's team on is a negotiation to build in the contract the capability, and obviously it's for the vendor's benefit as well, that we want to transition out of that contract as soon as possible and into this contract. And then whatever pricing structure we can get. We're in negotiations on the timing of when we can do that, because our ideal is if we can start migrating to this pricing structure even as soon as possible, we are trying to see if we can do that or negotiate a timeline, even if it's not exactly when we implement the new software.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last item under agency operations is adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee relating to the board's operating policies and procedures. Linda Battles and Bill Friends are available to answer these questions. I know this went out early, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to review it, and I do know there's been some modifications made. Linda, you have any comments on that?
Sure. We brought this to you back to the board meeting in July, and Mr. Steen had some edits that we worked with him on in the meantime. And so what you have in front of you is the final version that incorporated his edits, and happy to engage in any discussion if you have any questions about anything.
Any questions or discussions on this item? John?
Just to thank Mr. France and Ms. Battles for meeting with me, and I think they were good suggestions, and
absolutely.
And thank you for hearing me out, and appreciate it.
Comment.
His suggestions certainly made this a better document. I can.
Well, and I appreciate we started a long way from maybe in the spring from what we started with to here, and I appreciate you guys working on this. It was very well done. I think it's always good to have a little guidebook for everyone, and it's very helpful. So.
Can I make the motion?
Yes, sir. So I have a motion by John. I need a second.
I'll second the motion.
I have a second by Dora. Any further discussion?
It's a good thing.
I like that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. First item under financial reports is a report on the strategic financial or fiscal review. Deputy Commissioner Linda Battles will provide an overview of the process and data submitted to the LBB. This is just an information item, does not require any action. Linda?
Back in August, we notified you that Speaker Strauss had announced a new process for state agencies. He selected 17 state agencies, including the coordinating board, to undergo the strategic fiscal review, which is really a targeted budget review process. It's intended to provide comprehensive and detailed program-level data to the legislature. Oftentimes, they don't have the opportunity to review the data at that level, or don't have time to review it during the session. And so they really wanted to get more information from the agency so that they can evaluate and assess a program's funding alignment with the agency's mission and the state goals and so forth. It's our understanding that this is going to be an ongoing process by the legislature, and they intend to continue this next interim. So we're sort of in the pilot stage for them. But it's also our understanding that the remaining state agencies will go through this before we have to go through it again. But I can tell you that the commissioner and staff were really welcome the opportunity to tell our story through this process. So just a little, you can see the goals there that the speakers laid out for this process. These are just a list of affected agencies. They were selected to represent all articles of the appropriations bill. They're diverse in size, mission, and scope. Together, they represent over 20% of the all funds appropriations for the 14-15 budget. This is an example of some of the programmatic level data that they have requested, that the LBB has requested of us. It's a significant amount of data. We're asked to provide data beginning with the first full year of implementation of a program, and then for fiscal years 2010 projected all the way out to 2017. We had several programs where their funding had been eliminated in the 2011 session, but we were still required to provide information about those programs up until the last year of operation within this timeline. The LBB staff had developed the format for the data submission. We met with them on September 4th to get training on how to submit the data. And we were given less than 30 days to submit a significant amount of data. So that data was due on October 3rd. And I have to thank the staff from across the agency who really came together and dropped everything that they were working on to work on this. So unfortunately, it didn't give us a whole lot of time to get feedback from the board, but we tried to keep the board chairman and vice chairman in the loop, as well as sending you all periodic emails about what was going on with this process. Some additional data that has been requested is funding alternatives for each program at 3 funding levels: constant funding, reduced or eliminated funding, or enhanced funding. And this would depend on us to determine which are the programs that have the biggest return on the state's investment. And we could recommend enhanced funding and those programs that really align with our mission. What we did was, and this is a summary slide to show you how our recommendations in the state strategic fiscal review for alternative funding compared to our LAR exceptional items, which you approved last July. And you'll see in your packet that we provided to you today this spreadsheet that provides you with more details, but I just wanted to summarize what the differences are here. So on this slide you see where the particular programs that we recommended through the strategic fiscal review enhanced funding. And so it's important for me to note the differences between the alternative funding scenarios under this process and what you adopted in the LAR. The SFR is essentially a perfect world scenario where we would receive whatever amount of funding to maximize the state's return on investment in a program and to most effectively serve the state and agency goals. For the LAR process, we had to identify programs to recommend for additional funding while also being realistic of the legislature's capacity and appetite for significant funding increases. So as a result, the board limited the agency's exceptional item request to reasonable amounts and to those programs that most directly impact state goals. So in this, we were a little bit more aggressive in terms of recommending increases. So for Texas Beyond Time, for example, I'm not going to cover all of these, but for Texas Beyond Time, through the SFR process, we are recommending an additional $51.2 million on top of base level funding. We didn't include an exceptional item request for this program because we felt that the historical usage of the program, since institutions were leaving money on the table in previous years, there's a number of reasons for that. One primary reason is because the federal regulations consider us a preferred lender. And they federal laws prohibit institutions from promoting preferred lenders. So there's a lot of lack of awareness of the program, and the students essentially have to go to the institutions and ask for this program to see if they're eligible for packaging. So that's why there's been some underutilization in the past. Our Financial Aid Advisory Committee, which is composed of financial aid officers from the institutions, made the case in their last meeting to us that the demand is increasing, that word is getting out, that students are coming to their doors asking for this program, and they are really wanting to have access to those tuition revenues, the tuition set-asides that have been collected at the public institutions, the public universities, for this purpose, but have gone unappropriated. We estimated there's about over $120 million left in that tuition set-aside account, the GRD account, that has gone unappropriated. And so, obviously, that's a prerogative of the legislature to decide what they're going to do with those funds over time. Our recommendation is to at least appropriate the amount of tuition that is collected for the next biennium for 16-17, appropriate those amounts, those estimated amounts, to the coordinating board so we can then allocate it back to the institutions that collected those funds. We also are recommending...
Those funds are just sitting there now.
Correct. Unappropriated.
Okay.
And so there's also funds that come into us through loan repayments, and we would like to get those funds appropriated so that we can get them back to the institutions so that they can serve more students. That estimate is $51.2 million.
So what if the coordinating board voted and we think that whole program is wrong? You're just taking money from students. Mm-hmm. It should go back to the students.
Yes.
No, I mean to their pockets, not other students.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, and the legislature set it up this way back in 2003, and I think that will be an issue of concern for at least some members who believe the same way, and so we'll see how that goes next session.
It has certainly come up in the past legislatively. It's been debated.
I think maybe we should have a good discussion about it and maybe make a recommendation.
You can do that.
Yeah, certainly could.
The other item I wanted to highlight was the Advise Texas program. This is a program that provides recent college graduates to serve as near-peer advisors to students in high schools where there are low college going rates. And we had originally included an $8 million increase in our exceptional item request for this program. This is a program that was previously funded through federal funds through the College Access Challenge Grant program. Those monies have gone away. And we have been working on trying to raise funds to continue the program. It's an effective program. When we started to meet with legislative offices about this program, we got positive feedback and a high level of interest in the program and in fact expanding the program. And so we also heard from some superintendents that said that they really value the program and they're identifying ways to expand the program in their districts as well. So we thought an additional $4 million to the $8 million that we've requested will help to expand that to 160 advisors located in high schools across the state. We think this is a key program because of the changes in House Bill 5 to make sure that students have the information that they need to make the informed decisions, because they now have several choices for the pathway.
Can those advisors, can they make the students aware of the Be On Time program?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they have information about both financial aid opportunities as well as the admissions process and so forth. And they cover the gamut of, certificates, associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, 2-year, 4-year institutions. And they are specifically trained on those messages. I'm not going to go into any more detail on this. I did want to mention that the LBB on Wednesday of last week asked that we provide additional information for reduced funding scenario and enhanced funding scenario at 20% for 25 of our programs. And they identified those programs, but also said if we felt like we needed to add any. But the 25 programs range from all of our major student financial aid programs to some of the smaller programs like the doctoral incentive program and so forth. So we're currently working on that, and unfortunately I don't have anything to share with you at this time, but once we get that in, it is due today. So once we get that in, we will summarize it for you and send it out for your review, for your information. We also were asked to prioritize our programs, and here on this slide I just showed you how some of the principles that we used in prioritizing, and you'll see in your packet how we've ordered these programs, and number one being the most critical and the last one being the least critical. I want to point out again the contrast between the LAR and this SFR process. In the LAR process, we always rank student financial aid as our highest priority. In this is a little different process because we're not being asked which programs we would propose for increases, but rather which programs are most critical for us to be able to achieve our goals. And since we can't really perform any functions, including administering student financial aid, without staff and other administrative resources, we highly prioritized our administrative strategies. Among the administrative strategies, we ranked funding for planning, information, and evaluation as number one because we think data, planning, and analysis really permeates everything that we do here at the agency. We also use the LAR exceptional item requests rankings as a starting point for prioritizing our trustee programs. So you can see Texas Grants, TEOG, GME, they're all our top 3 prioritized non-administrative programs. We put federally and privately funded programs towards the bottom of the priority list, since these are really non-discretionary funds. And we put UTB TSC transition funding second to last, because it's a one-time funding mechanism that should go away next session. And finally, the Higher Education Policy Institute, which is the privately funded program here at the coordinating board. We no longer have any funds that go through the agency. They are now administered by the College for All Texans Foundation. So that shouldn't be in our budget. And finally, last slide is the LBB's analysis of the data and what they're going to be looking at. They're obviously going to have a very robust analysis of the data. They'll look at internal, external factors that affect the programs. They'll review the method of finance. A lot of times, general revenue gets a lot of the attention during the session. More recently, they started looking at general revenue dedicated, but this is an all funds approach, and they'll be looking at also other constitutional funds and so forth. They'll look closely at program effectiveness and return on investment. If some programs show to provide a higher return on investment, they'll consider increased funding for that program. They'll look closely at our mission, statutory authority to administer the programs, taking into account directives from the legislature. They'll examine the programs that have evolved over time and see if they still match the statutory intent of the program. Again, they're going to be digesting an enormous amount of data, and they're still working on how they're going to present this to the legislature so that it's meaningful to them, so that they can make some good sense out of it. The House Appropriations Subcommittee on Article 3 had its first meeting to talk about this, and the commissioner presented on the agency's mission, goals, and objectives, some of the accomplishments that we're able to do and impact statewide higher education and the state's economy. We are expecting to have additional hearings called before the session to allow the committee to really dig into the data that we've provided through this process. We haven't heard when the next hearing is going to be as of yet, but we anticipate that happening soon. That's all I had.
Okay. Questions? Thank you, Linda. Next item is an update on the Be On Time internal audit management response. Ken Martin will provide a brief update, and this is just an update, no action required. Ken, welcome back.
Thank you. As you all may recall, back in May, you had a special session in which a Be On Time, Mark Pale reviewed the Be On Time audit results. And Arturo Alonso last July had presented the results of the management's responses and to the audit findings. At that point in time, we had 6 out of 11 items completed, and some were partially implemented. Within your materials that you received 2 weeks ago, we had 9 items out of 11 implemented, and I'm pleased to announce with the Commissioner's announcement of the agency reorganization this last Friday that one of those items now is completed, which was the agency reorganization. So as of this point, we have 10 out of the 11 action items completed. The one item that still remains is on the agency's risk assessment, and we're in the process of working through that and building out an agency risk policy. We're working with Mark Pale and his department on that as well. With that, happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions?
10 out of 11 is good. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thanks, Ken. Last item under financial reports is the review of the fiscal year end 2014 financial reports. In 2009, the board requested a quarterly report at every agency operations committee meeting. Once again, Ken Martin is going to provide a brief overview. This is just a report, no action required. Ken?
I'll provide a brief overview, as Mr. Huckabee mentions, but if you have any questions on any of the detail, we provided this report 2 weeks ago. please feel free, and I'll be happy to walk you through any points. I walked through this report back in the July meeting as well. Now, one thing I want to mention is the Commissioner, we had walked through this report a couple months ago internally and had asked to take a look at this report. Can this be more meaningful? This report hadn't been modified for a couple years, and with various changes, we took a look at the report, and one of the items that we wanted to add on there and provide more emphasis was on our loan program. So you'll see on the first page, it's been revised. The first page previously in the summary was our operating budget. But our operating budget, for the most part, remained stagnant for the entire year. So you were seeing the same number quarter after quarter on that first page. It wasn't very meaningful after the first snapshot. What I thought here would be more meaningful is a picture of our loan program. This report is as of August 31st, year-end or fiscal year-end. And it just provides various metrics. I won't go through all the details, but again, happy to answer any questions on them. But I have broken out the operating budget in totality on here, and then our trustee strategies as well, listed in summary. And then on the various pages as you go through, you'll see all those broken out into the level of detail they were previously, as well as budget adjustments that have occurred throughout the year, and then our federal program as well.
I know everybody got this in advance. Any questions or comments related to this report? Okay. Ken, thank you very much. Okay, the first item under audit is an update on the internal audit reports and activities. Mark Pale, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will provide the update. Again, this is just a report, no action required. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 6A is an informational item, and we want to just bring you up to date on internal audit reports and things that we're working on since the last meeting that we had with you in July. We completed 3 internal audits since the last AOC meeting, and these reports are included in your materials. There were 2 follow-up projects. We're pleased to report that the prior recommendations have been addressed. And then the third report was our review of Texas Grant Administration, and that's in your materials as well. That report received a Category 2 report rating. There were actually some observations really centered in 2 areas. There were some statutory compliance issues related to certain provisions of the program, and then there were a couple of issues that pertain to strengthening information systems controls over the Texas Grant data. And so the management responses are included in the report, and as you can see, management has stated that it has implemented corrective actions for most of the reported issues in that Texas Grant report. Our other work is in process and includes completion of projects that got carried forward from last year's audit plan, and conducting work as well on the FY15 audit plan that you approved in July. So that is my update on our internal audit activities and reports, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Mark? Okay. The last item under audit is a report on the benchmarking for internal audit staff. Mark Pale, once again, will present the benchmarking study and key issues regarding internal audit staffing. Mark?
Thank you. This is another informational item only. I'd like to present the results of some benchmarking information, which is a follow-up discussion from a dialogue that we had at our last committee meeting in July. And if you will recall, at that time I presented the audit plan for your approval, and that plan was based on some supervisory hours of myself, as well as 1 full-time dedicated internal audit staff member. And I said at that time that I saw the need to reevaluate whether or not internal auditing resources were sufficient, and that ultimately it came down to the risk appetite of the board in terms of how much audit work that we could perform in any given year. So I suggested, and you concurred, that I bring this data to today's meeting to have further discussions about the proper amount of resources for our internal audit resources for our agency. The benchmarking exercise is, I did some informal benchmarking when I first began here in 2012. I understand that there was some benchmarking that had been done previously in 2007 in this agency. And then I think now is a good time to take another look at it. I think we've had a number of organizational changes. We've had some increased stakeholder scrutiny, and with compliance monitoring and some of the federal subrecipient monitoring now under my purview, I've had an opportunity to sort of see how it all works, wearing multiple hats, and see how much coverage we're able to achieve in each of those areas. So I think it's an opportune time to take a look at this. The next slide that you have is current internal audit coverage. I alluded to that a moment ago. The FY15 plan that you approved in July really gave us coverage in about 1.5 out of 3 of the major areas of the organization. And with the third area for FY15 going without audit coverage. And then there are other areas. Mr. Steen had a question earlier in the meeting about purchasing is a good example of that, or procurement, and that is one of those other areas of the organization. So that's not included in the 3 major areas, but obviously procurement is an important area. Human resources is another. That they're listed there on the slide, and those are the old terms. I know that some of these division names and have changed with the reorganization, but you get the sense of what it is that we're tasked with covering. And if Sharon can switch us over to the next to last slide, this is a visual depiction of what it is that we're tasked with covering, and there's a couple takeaways from this slide that I would like to try to leave you with. As you work your way up this diagram, there's basically 3 layers to this cake, if you will. So the bottom layer is the work that we must perform. It's required by statute. It's required by internal auditing standards. A good example of that is investigations that we look into that get passed to us from various sources. The second layer are the 3 major areas of risk and activity and significance for this organization: grants and special programs, loan program operations, and information solutions and services. And then the third layer of this tiered diagram are all of the other areas of the organization that arguably on a risk basis we need to be in those other areas as well periodically, perhaps every 3 to 4 years, something like that, just so that we can continue to have a presence across the organization. On the right side of that diagram, you'll notice that's the staffing. That's really how much coverage we can provide with a given level of staffing. So the red line you see ties in with the director and 1 auditor. So that's basically the plan that you approved in July. And you can see the level of coverage that we're able to provide. The second line would be with the addition of 1 staff that gets us all the way through the second level and into the third area of other risk-based audits. And then if we added 2 additional staff, then you can see we're actually cycling through some of those areas on the top of the diagram. So now if you'll return to the slide, current operational challenges. This is just what I alluded to a minute ago. We have some experience now. Federal subrecipient monitoring is one individual that's performing a monitoring work that's required under federal regulations. That individual came under my purview in December of 2013, as well as you know, the compliance monitoring function that's now fully staffed with 4. And so we start to see certain challenges. I've experienced those challenges in and just the amount of review work that's required. The federal subrecipient work is approximately 70 projects that have a definite time frame that have to be completed in order for us to pass scrutiny when KPMG and SAO comes in and looks at our operations every year. So there's a lot of direct review time that I find myself spending under this current organizational structure. So we benchmarked it in the slide with benchmarking process there. We used an industry standard tool. Institute of Internal Auditors is our governing organization, and they've had a benchmarking tool that's been in existence since 1992. And there's 4 fairly common metrics for trying to figure out what's the right size of an internal audit shop for a given organization. And so we look at the dimensions of expenses, organizational expenses per auditor, revenues per auditor, assets per auditor, and employees per auditor. And, any one of those in isolation, you can ask certain questions about whether or not, how reflective of risk is one given metric. But sort of when you look at them collectively, it gives you a little bit more meaningful view of what how you compare to other organizations. One other aspect of this benchmarking process is we're not comparing ourselves to Fortune 500 companies. This tool actually allows us to compare. We had 3 subpopulations that we compared ourselves against: government organizations, organizations of similar asset size, and then college and university institutions. So the results are on the next slide. You can see across the 4 dimensions, we range from benchmarking against, on the revenue side, 7 audit FTEs to employees per auditor showing less than 1 audit FTE. So when you kind of look at all of these metrics together, which is really the best way of approaching this exercise, the average is 4 audit FTEs. That average is consistent with the information that I saw back from 2007. It's also consistent with some sort of quick and dirty analysis that I did when I started here in 2012. So I'm pretty comfortable that number is a pretty good number. So now if you jump over to the last slide, this is the direction that we would like to move in, and we've actually already been given the funds to move forward with 1 position, and a second position is in our part of our legislative request, the strategic fiscal review, as an enhanced spending item. So the bottom of that diagram you see, that's our current org structure and staffing, and then the top. What we would like to do is add an audit supervisor position, and we're working on that presently. And that's not just going to be, that's going to be doing some day-to-day review and some things that are kind of gobbling up my time, as well as actually carrying a direct workload and being able to do additional audits that we're discussing here today. And then the other internal audit position would be hopefully something that we would get funding for in the future, so that we could actually move fully to the 4 that would put us in line with comparable organizations. So that's where we're at right now. My thought is that once we get go through the process, find the right individual for the audit supervisor position, I can reevaluate our FY 2015 audit plan at that time, come back to the committee, hopefully add an audit or 2 based on the addition of that position, and I think we'll be a stronger audit organization, and I think it'll put us in line with other organizations that are similar to ourselves. So be happy to answer any questions or provide additional information at this time.
Questions for Mark? Sada.
You know that as our distinguished Honorable Secretary Steen has a way of saying that he is new to this thing, I must also qualify that I'm a new kid on this block, so excuse me if I'm asking you something not very, not something that I represent as an expert. But based on what you just suggested, this analysis that you were saying is based on the industry standard which are in place since 1992.
The benchmark.
Now, the innovation and the technology is 2014. What I would like, and I just want to hear from you, is that I hope and wish and desire and pray that this 1992 tool has been upgraded to 2014 technology.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You've answered me.
There are probably 75 to 100 different questions and information that we feed into it, and there's a whole array of what type of software do we use, and all of those things are factored in. Yes, sir.
Thank you. John?
I think I said it at the last meeting, but your overview of this is what our risk for our appetite for risk is, and mine's zero. I sitting on this board, I want to make sure that you've got the resources you need to do this job. So what you're saying right now, you have two, and you're going to be able to pick up a third, and you'd
Correct.
like to get to four.
That's correct.
All right. And getting to four, help me with this, Commissioner, but do we have can we, if the board voted to do that, could we accomplish that? Pick up a fourth?
Well, if you voted to do it, we'd have to find the resources.
I mean, I would be in favor of doing that. And the other thought I had, of course, I've been with agencies where we've had the internal audit functions been done by outsiders at a very reasonable cost.
Right.
I can't remember the guy right now. I work so closely with him at the TABC, but that's another thought. If we could, in order to get to where you want to be, if we could send some of these audits to an outsider.
Sure. And that might be a good option, if the legislative environment is not favorable and we don't receive the support, then we might be able to look to, contracting out certain aspects of work, certain risks that we need to address, but if we don't have the FTE.
Mark, as a point of reference, why don't you, how many staff did you have in the Office of Internal Audit when you first arrived?
It was myself and two.
And two others?
Yes.
And how many staff do you have now?
Myself and one. And then on the internal audit side.
Well, I should say the entire operation that you oversee.
Correct. If you look at the entire operation, it's one internal auditor, 4 compliance specialists that are doing the college and university compliance work, and then 1 federal compliance specialist.
And we've done that with fewer resources than we had when you first arrived.
Yes.
But we've been trying to upgrade. Mr. Steen, my idea, and Mark and I had a discussion about this. Could we? I agree that I'd like to be able to have a level of zero risk. We don't have the resources to do that when you consider all the other calls on our resources that we have. And so I've asked Mark to define what is an acceptable level of risk given auditing standards and so forth. And my understanding is we can probably meet that standard with 1 additional personnel. So I said, well, we can't go below an acceptable level of risk. And meanwhile, we will look to see how this works, and we will look for other resources. But I certainly appreciate how important this issue is and how important it is to the board.
Linda?
I just wanted to point out that the legislature, because they mandated the compliance monitoring function in our sunset bill, provided funding to support those 4 FTE. So what we've been able to do with the newest audit supervisor position that Mark has is that we've been able to use existing funds to support that. And so we're just saying for the second one, you know, we've included it in our strategic fiscal review funding for an additional FTE, and we'll be, you know, asking the legislature for that. But I think as we move forward, also we can look at other efficiencies over the next biennium if we can achieve those.
I was just wondering, your calculations, did you take into effect like any newer work that will be coming to you because of new schools being built, or expansion of schools, expansion of programs, more work that you're going to have in the future?
Actually, you know, the benchmarking was as of the most recent financial and organizational information. So I guess the short answer to that question is no. We did not factor in that if the growth is not too significant, you know, we end up risk ranking our entire audit environment. So effectively what that would mean is that if we added, you know, new programs, and those programs were relatively risky, let's say because of their new, you know, they were new and significant, those programs would rise up towards the top of our list, and then something that was near the bottom of our list would move down and potentially would not be covered. The more things you add, those things get risk ranked, and so other things are going to end up potentially falling off the plate.
Harold.
If I'm looking at this, Mark, you're indicating an audit supervisor and an internal auditor for future consideration. So is this indicating that you just want to, for the time being, you want to add an audit supervisor?
Right. This discussion has evolved as the materials were submitted, and so you're seeing some language that's a little bit outdated. The audit supervisor position, the commissioner, Linda, they've identified the funds for that, and we're actually in the early stages of creating a requisition and going through the process to identify the right person for that position. The internal auditor position, management commissioner, they've bought off on the importance of that position, but given the current budget environment, rather than there was no ability to fund that presently, and so that position was put into the enhanced item request as part of the strategic fiscal review. So it's really not being considered, it's been requested, and the hope is...
The exceptional items are... No.
It's outside of the LAR exceptional item because this benchmarking study had not been done at the time that you all adopted the LAR. So we saw the strategic fiscal review as an opportunity to get that out in front of the legislature and hopefully get some support that way.
Chairman Hahn, I'd like to give him the fourth position. I think it's so important to us as board members that we have a vigorous auditing function going on. And Commissioner, you're saying if you could find the funds if we wanted to do this?
We'll have to. It's a directive from the board, and we will comply with it.
Well, basically, you're going to have to cut something else to do that.
Could you come back to us at a future meeting and say, this is how we can get there, so we could at least look at it?
Well, I feel a sense of urgency in your position. We'll pass the information along as soon as we figure out a remedy.
Thank you very much. Well, and it's just me speaking. I don't know how the other board members feel.
Share your concern. I think more is better.
This is important, very, very important to us that we get to where you want to be, Mr. Paul.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Dora?
It was just alluded to, but we did mention contracting out. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of organizations and even education and schools do a lot of contracting out for audits. And I sort of like that idea because you're bringing in a fresh new team that is not internal. And they're bringing new ideas, and they're really coming in fresh, hitting the ground running, doing their work, and getting out. And I've always liked the contracting out for audits. I've seen it work very, very well in the past, and I've seen them uncover things that sometimes internally you're really into it and you want to find everything that's there, but you're used to the same thing, and sometimes you don't uncover facts that are visible there. So I am a proponent of contracting out, especially on audits. I've seen them used. Of course, I've seen some not very good ones, but
Right.
I'm going to say that overall, I have seen some very good auditors.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it really depends on the context, what situations you choose to use that approach and that tool. Information systems is a very good example. That's a highly technical area, very difficult for us to staff full-time the kind of expertise and cutting-edge knowledge to continually perform that type of work. And so you can hire experts to come in, supervise the contract, administer the contract, receive the deliverable, but they're the ones that are keeping up with the burden of being cutting edge and understanding all the latest security risks and so forth. So there are situations where that's very relevant and appropriate. Other situations where an auditor might need to understand the culture of the organization better and maybe understand the agency's systems. In those situations, it might not work quite as well because the freshness is not as much of an advantage potentially. So I think if you're selective about where that's applied, it can be used very effectively, and that's an additional thing that we could look at potentially doing to help offset the need for FTEs, or potentially to enhance if whether we end up with 3 or 4, whatever ultimately we end up with. I view that as being kind of an enhancement item.
I do too.
Ms. Alcala, we will take a look at that as an option.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Next item under compliance monitoring. Under compliance monitoring is an update on the compliance monitoring reports and activities. Once again, Mark Pale will provide this update. It's an update, not an action item. Mark?
Thank you. This is my final item. This is compliance monitoring reports and activities. We completed 7 projects for this reporting period since the presentation to you in July. 5 formula funding engagements and 2 financial aid engagements. And so you have all 7 of those reports in your materials. One of those 7 projects, which was a financial aid audit of Texas Grant at UT San Antonio, actually had a reportable condition or observation, and that in that particular audit there was a need for UTSA to be able to better demonstrate the payment of Texas Grant to its recipients or students. Their accounting system was not set up in a way to clearly show the disbursement information, and so we worked with UTSA in terms of understanding what the need was there and the requirement, and so we have a very affirmative kind of response and action that's already been said to have occurred by UTSA management, and that management response is included with your information as well. In terms of the rest of the, where we're at right now, we're finishing up the last aspects of 2014's work, and we're already well down the path on the 2015 project. So things are moving fast and working quite well. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions? Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 8 is executive session. Under Texas Government Code Section 551.071, the committee will meet in closed session to discuss Board Rule Section 1.16, contract for materials and services and consideration of contract approval process. The time is 3:05. We are going to reconvene from the executive session. The time now is 3:32. This concludes our meeting. Do I have a motion for adjournment? I'm sorry.
Don't you have to say that no action was taken in executive session?
You know, I don't have that on my script, but I will just to make sure we cover it because we did not take any action. So no action was taken as a result of the executive session. Thank you.
And I'll
So I have a motion by Mr. Steen, a second by Dora. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thankfully none. Motion passes. We are adjourned.